Greetings, traveler of hours. I am the Watcher. Before we drift into the past, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? I read every note before I rest. Perhaps you are curled beneath blankets while the night presses close, or perhaps the sun lingers still, hesitant to set. Whatever your hour, you are welcome here beside me. I have walked the long corridors of time with quiet feet, and often it is cloth that brushes my fingertips first. A sleeve lifting its tired hem to catch a draft of memory, a shawl breathing out the ghost of lavender, a sash whispering the name of a vanished maker. In market squares and dyers' gardens, in the hush of cloisters and the clatter of water mills, I have watched matter turn to meaning. Fiber coaxed from earth and beast and worm, color steeped like prayer, edges tamed, and measures read the way a sailor reads stars. I am the Watcher, and I have kept company with looms as with kings, with a thimble as with a throne. If my voice brings you comfort, you may choose to follow me, and drift beside me through the ages. We will move without hurry. We will listen for the small music of fiber against skin, the slow grammar of seams, the vows sworn in dye and grease and thread. Breathe with me soft and low. Let the night set its hand upon your brow. I will show you workshops before dawn and rivers the color of figs. I will show you how a garment gathers the shape of a life and remembers it, even after the life has walked away. And now the lamps are lowered, and the loom waits like a patient creature at rest. Come with me into the first chamber of this long woven book. Before birds weigh the light with their first notes, I stand at the margin of a cool field where dew stitches the earth to morning. Flax rises there with quiet purpose, slender and undecided between stem and breeze, tipping pale blossoms like tiny lamps before the wind. I watched it sown in disciplined lines by hands that knew the patience of seasons. Now I watch the field agree to be gathered back. Each plant is drawn from the soil with a steady pull, not cut, for flax keeps best what is taken whole. The roots come up smelling of rain kept in a jar. In a barn whose boards remember many winters, the seed heads are rippled through a comb, a soft rain of promise pattering into sacks. Bundles are laid to steep in slow water beneath a sky that does not hurry, and in that dark, the green self loosens its grip. Weeks pass like uncounted beads. What clung, releases. What was stalk yields its thread. Then the scutching, wood on wood, a patient scraping that sounds like distant wings. The brittle husk falling away, straw to one side, usable grace to the other. Iron hackles wait, teeth shining with old discipline. Through them the fibers pull, again and again, until long silvered strands lie like a river combed straight, and the shorter toe rests like fog at their feet. Spinners take their places as if entering prayer. A wheel turns with a heartbeat's measure. Fingers draw, twist, and offer the line forward. Breath steadies, the thread steadies, and a hush gathers around the work the way dusk gathers around a garden. On the loom, warp holds like law and weft wanders like thought. The shuttle's quick flight is a small bird learning the room. Beat after beat, linen arrives, cool as kept water, calm as a folded letter. It is washed upon stones that know the names of many families. It is laid in bleaching fields to sip daylight until it learns to keep it. Smoothed with glass, beetled till it murmurs under the hand, linen becomes a second, tender honesty. Against skin it is river and shade. It is summer rescued from heat. And when the wearer steps away, I have seen the garment remain, remembering the slope of a shoulder, the bend of a day's labor. Linen forgives, but it does not forget. In its pale grammar, the body writes itself, and the cloth keeps the lesson. On the uplands where stone walls walk like old thoughts, I have stood among sheep that carry the season on their backs. Their breath is a mild cloud. Their gaze is winterwise. When shearing time comes, the flock gathers into a hush of trust and puzzlement. Steel whispers. The fleece loosens and slips whole, a soft map of the slope, the wind, the long nibble of days. Laid open, it still holds last week's rain as a memory, and the scent of lanolin rises. Clean, animal, and faintly sweet, like a promise kept near the skin. Hands sort the locks by length and curl, the way a reader sets aside favored lines. Warm water and patience wash the field from the wool. Yet some grease remains, a kindness against roughness, a balm for working palms. Then the teasing begins. On cards of wire or on the old bowed combs, the fibers learn to lie beside one another, not in perfect obedience, but in a friendly tangle that makes warmth possible. I have watched a spindle take that cloud and draw it into a line that remembers breath. I have watched a wheel turn as steadily as a monk's chant, twist upon twist, until a yarn with a quiet backbone walks out across the room. There are two tempers to wool. One is worsted, long and smooth, like a path pressed by many feet. It sheds rain with polite indifference and keeps its sheen. The other is woolen, airy and forgiving, full of hidden chambers where heat lingers and the day can rest. Both know weather. Both answer a fog-laden dawn with the same even courage. On the loom, wool is a different music from linen. The shuttle's passage is muffled, and the beater speaks in a low drum. I lay my palm upon the web and feel hillside and hearth in answer. Later, when teasels lift the nap, the cloth grows a small meadow on its face, and the light moves there as wind once moved through grass. Tailors test a breadth of broadcloth the way a baker tests a risen loaf, curving it over an arm, listening for its will to shape and shelter. Worn in frost or rain, the garment learns the wearer's rhythm, and the nap takes on the tale of a life. Gate climbed, lamb found, market crossed. I read such stories by touch. In the soft rise and fall, the hillside still speaks. I have walked beside camels whose steps make a patient music, bells chiming like small, bright moons in daylight. Across dunes that breathe and overpasses where stone keeps its own counsel, the caravans carry hush and rumor in equal measure. In their bales sleep cocoons, pale as moth breath, each one a quiet promise spun in a room of leaves and darkness. Mulberry trees remember the gentle gnawing of mouths that never saw the sun, only the steady green of their one devotion. I have stood in those houses where the air is warm and the world is measured by appetite and silk, and I have listened to the rustle that sounds like snowfall learning to speak. When the time comes, water is heated to a respectful hush, and the cocoons are bathed until the stubborn gum grows tender. Women with fingers that can hear find the loose end, a whisper of filament so fine it is more intention than thread. Not one strand but several rise together, guided across a ring of twigs, gathering into a single patient line. The reel turns with the slow assurance of a prayer wheel, and skeins accrue. Cloud made obedient, moonlight taught to behave. The gum remains at first. The silk keeps its modest stiffness, as if remembering the chamber it protected. Later, washing will soften it to a yielding glow. On the loom, silk remembers water. It flows where wool would breathe and linen would keep counsel. Warp shines like a river set in order. Weft passes with a secret smile. I have watched pattern creep across the field like a garden in moonlight. Pomegranates opening, cranes stepping through reeds, knotwork that knows no ending. A drawman, light on his feet, lifts chords in a learned dance, and the shuttle obeys, obedient as a swallow. Satin smooths the hand like a blessing. Damask hides and reveals with each tilting of the day. Dyers love silk because silk loves them back. Color sinks deep without argument. Indigo becoming midnight on quiet water, weld answering as soft sun, matter warming to the memory of heart. Hold a length to a lamp and the flame walks inside it, curious and approving. I have seen princes lean closer then, not for wealth alone but for the wonder of light tamed by patience. They touch by permission, and the cloth answers with a sound not quite audible, like a secret consenting. And always the wind, pilgrim and witness, takes a thread sigh and carries it onward, over salt, over sand, toward other hands, other looms, other nights. At first light, I step into a garden that keeps its own chapel hush. Beds lie in measured rectangles, each bordered with the tidy patience of hands that love both order and wonder. Here woad lifts blue-green leaves with the gravity of a psalm. Their weld rises in slim torches of yellow thought. Farther on, matter creeps close to the soil, its roots knitting secret fire beneath the calm. Bees work as if reciting, and the path is sprinkled with the dry perfume of crushed herb and sun-warmed dust. The dyer moves among these plots like a reader in a familiar book, fingers testing leaf and stem, eyes listening for the note of readiness. Woad is gathered early, when the day is still young enough to be persuaded. Leaves are bruised and shaped, pressed into balls that dry like pocket moons. Later they will be coaxed awake in a vat, heat low, talk low, a discipline of breath. The liquor, shy of air, grumbles softly. Its color is not yet the blue everyone dreams of, but a troubled green, the shade of a river thinking. Skeins and lengths are dipped in shadow and lifted into the light, and there the miracle completes itself. From leaf to dusk to sky, as air kisses thread and blue grows sure, weld asks a clearer flame. The stalks simmer in bright patience, and their strength travels into the bath with gratitude. Cloth goes in pale as milk and rises with the tint of straw at harvest, a yellow that gives courage to other hues, steadying them as a good friend steadies a timid step. Matter is a different counsel. Its roots come up like buried ember, washed, dried, and broken to release the old warmth of earth. In copper kettles the bath deepens through rust and rose toward the sober heart of red. Time matters here, so does mordant, the quiet covenant between fiber and color, alum measured by habit more than by scale, the way a grandmother measures flour. Along the dye-house wall, poles carry their flocks of dripping skeins. Blues breathe out a faint memory of vat and herb. Yellows sigh of fields. Reds keep a hearth inside themselves. The dyer's hands are stained with a gentle map of labor. Nails rimmed in dusk, palms warmed by root and leaf, signs as intimate as prayer. Recipes are kept like psalms, altered by weather, by water, by the character of a single pot. And always the river waits nearby to rinse, to cool, to carry away the excess brightness, leaving only what the cloth can truthfully hold. There is a certain hour before night owns the sky when blue is almost thought, and black is the hush that follows it. I have waited in dye houses at that hour, when the vats give off their patient breath and the dyer's eyes weigh depth like a jeweler. Blue and black are kin by difficulty, distant by temperament. Blue arrives like revelation. Black must be argued with. For blue, the vat is a living thing, shy of air and fond of secrecy. Woad sleeps under its crust the color of pond water, and the liquor keeps its counsel. Into this shadow the skein is laid, not for long, not with haste. The dyer lifts it out and the thread smiles green, doubtful, as if surprised to find itself awake. Then air completes the sentence. I have watched that green turn to sky upon the very breath that touches it, layer after layer, each dip another page in the book of dusk. A deep blue asks for patience in plural. Many returns to the silent well, many risings to the light. Black is a different pilgrimage. Few plants grant it without tribute. Some begin with walnut or oak, the tannin-rich gifts of bark and gall. Others lean on iron, that grave metal which binds color as a vow binds word. Cloth is soaked and steeped, mordant and persuaded, then often overdyed upon itself. Blue laid down first to darken the road, madder or weld whispered over it to complete the night. True black loves will more readily than linen, and even then it can ask a toll. I have felt cloth embrittled by too much iron, a quiet crackle beneath the hand, as if the color had eaten a little of the strength to secure its throne. Yet when it succeeds, black carries a gravity that straightens the back. I have seen magistrates step into halls like midnight given edges. I have watched nuns move like parentheses around silence. Blue, meanwhile, keeps its gentler awe the shade of distant hills, the borrowed robe of the holy. Both colors hold expense within them. Wood for heat, herbs in measure, labor counted not in coins but in hours of breath and stirring. And still the river forgives. It rinses away the boast and leaves the truth of hue, blue like evening water, black like its depth. In garments so dyed, people seem to speak more softly, as if respectful of the night they carry. Where a stream agrees to hurry a little for human need, a mill house leans into the current like a sleeper into a pillow. I have stood beneath its eaves while the race ran bright as an unsheathed blade, and the wheel turned with a grave patience, lifting water to its own work and letting it fall again. Inside, cams on a slow shaft raise wooden hammers one by one, and then release them into troughs where cloth waits in folds like bread set to rise. The sound is not violent but complete, a round, reassuring thunder that enters the bones and settles there as a second pulse. Will comes to this door bearing the day, grease that remembered the yew, burrs with the memory of hill paths, the mild breath of pasture. It is laid in a bath prepared by old understanding, soft water if the valley grants it, a cleansing earth to drink the oils, the sharp-smelling liquor that households once contributed with a kind of communal nod. The cloth is turned and turned until it grows receptive, and then the hammers speak. Down they come, steady as rain on a barn roof, coaxing fiber to take fiber by the hand. Gaps close. Warmth learns new rooms. What was web becomes felted comradeship, thicker, kinder to wind. I have watched a fuller pause to test the change, thumb and forefinger reading the nap the way a priest reads a page. Too little and weather will bully it. Too much and the cloth grows sullen, losing its drape. Measure here is a matter of touch and listening. The note the mallet makes, the way the wool exhales when lifted from its bath. The mill keeps time for a whole hamlet, its beat counting hours of labor and loaves cooling on windowsills. Children fall asleep to it. Lovers remember it. Old men wake at night and know by the cadence how the water stands in the brook. When the cloth has learned its lesson, it is rinsed in the stream until the water runs honest. Then to the tenter field it goes, stretched on frames with tidy iron hooks, drawn back to the width promised at the stall. The wind walks among the hanging lengths like a kindly inspector, and the sun writes its faint blessing. Later, teasels may raise a mild meadow on the face. A press may settle the nap to obedience. Yet the heart work was done in the mill, where wood and water shared a rhythm, and stubborn wool agreed, under that thoughtful thunder, to become shelter. Along the margin of every honest cloth runs a coast of its own making, a firm shoreline where the shuttle turned and turned again. I have traced that selvage with a fingertip and felt the weaver's caution there. Threads packed close, a little denser, a little steadier, so that Frey would think twice before venturing further. It is the place where the loom declares, thus far and no more. Markets trusted it. A bolt unrolled upon a trestle told its width at a glance. A merchant's palm measured the span from selvage to selvage the way a sailor reads the distance between stars. Sometimes a colored pair of threads ran the length like narrow ribbons, a quiet heraldry naming the workshop without a word. Tailors greeted the edge as a mapmaker greets a coast. Warp runs with the gravity of plumb, true as a bell rope. Weft crosses like calm water under a bridge. In that meeting of straight and cross lies the law of garments. I have watched a cutter lift a breadth of wool and let it hang, reading the fall until the cloth spoke. On the straight grain, clothing keeps its counsel, firm as bread still warm. On the cross, it yields a little more, like a gate unlatched. Set corner to corner, on that tender diagonal where threads agree to share the burden, and the cloth learns to pour like evening. Dancing gowns love that pathway. Working coats keep to the straight road. Chalk is a pale moon in the tailor's hand. He draws his lines as a scribe draws margins, never forcing a shape against the grain's old wisdom. A selvage tucked inside a seam lends strength as a friend lends an arm on ice. A waistband cut along it holds its duty without complaint. There are economies here, small and decent. A strip of selvage saved for ties, a narrow facing that will not revel in the dark years of wear. Measure, too, has its liturgy. I have seen L-wands burnished by generations, their marks rubbed smooth by advice and argument. Some were the length of a reaching arm, some a little less, for towns kept their own customs and would not be hurried into agreement. Tailors also kept cords knotted at intervals, a traveling memory when wood was not at hand. Fingers and thumbs served as minor saints of measure, breadths, and nail widths, small, trustworthy units that fit neatly into a day's reckoning. When the pieces are cut, the room grows quieter, as if a sermon had ended. Selvage to the edge, grain to its proper way, the work proceeds with an inward ease. And if you lift the finished garment to the light, you may glimpse that first boundary still, an old shoreline hidden in the hem, reminding the body gently where the world began. I have stepped into guild halls where oak beams kept the breath of many winters, and candles bent their small knees toward polished tables. On those boards lay emblems that were more than tools. Shears heavy as a verdict, a tailor's goose warm from the banked coals, a burnished thimble that had pressed 1,000 pricks of danger away from living skin. Around them, masters and journeymen gathered with the gravity of tides, apprentices keeping to the edges with eyes bright and still. In such rooms, craft grew a backbone. Work that had been a household habit stood upright and spoke in vows. Across the thresholds of trade, marks served where voices could not go. I have seen a lead seal bite a selvage with its little teeth, leaving behind a sign known to distant counters. A pair of shears crossed like quiet swords, a shuttle flying, a mallet poised above a trough. These were promises hammered into metal, carried through rain and dispute. A bolt unrolled in a foreign hall might murmur the name of a far river by way of that small seal. A merchant, tracing it with a fingernail, would nod, remembering the character of cloth from that city, its steadiness, its temper under the needle. Oaths were spoken in words worn smooth by use. An apprentice, hands still smelling of soap and chalk, would place 2 fingers upon the shears and swear to measure true, to keep the grain's counsel, to pad no sleeve with deceit, to reveal recipes only to those entitled by years and patience. A dyer swore to water and fire both, promising to temper heat as one tempers anger, to feed vats with the right hunger, to return color that would not shame in rain or sweat. Fullers vowed to thunder and silence, weavers to rhythm and rest. The guild wrote these vows in their rolls, but the real writing was on the body, in the set of a shoulder over a table, in the humble way a hand tested cloth without hurry. There were feast days, too, laughter carefully folded, songs that kept time with the treadle. Yet even celebrations served the law of craft. The youngest poured ale for the oldest, learning how respect travels hand to hand. Disputes were settled with a reed's evenness. Fines in coin or cloth, a period of humbler tasks, sometimes a night alone with the tools, to listen to what they asked for. I have stood at doorways when a journeyman, having wandered from town to town with a bundle of work and hope, returned to knock. The masters examined his masterpiece under quiet breath, counting stitches not as numbers but as intentions kept. When they were satisfied, they set the mark beside his name, and the hall exhaled. A new keeper of secrets had been welcomed, and in the street outside, where night pressed its cool cheek to stone, the craft itself seemed to glow a little, needles, shears, and oaths holding fast the fabric of a city. I have walked from damp lowlands to sunstruck courts and over hills clipped close by sheep, and everywhere the loom learned the tongue of its country. Cloth keeps whether the way stone keeps light. It remembers water, soil, and the pace of local footsteps. In the flat, mist-tended towns of the north, workshops breathed a sober rhythm. I felt the river air lean cool through open shutters, and I watched threads submit to an exacting order. Flemish hands praised evenness above all. Warps were set like well-laid canals. Wefts crossed with the patience of barges. Worsteds there were combed long and smooth, each fiber agreeing to lie beside its neighbor as citizens do along a levee. The cloth that followed held a quiet strength, tight, close, and disciplined, so that a sleeve kept its line through years of market rain. In halls where wall hangings multiplied the warmth of firelight, tapestry wove entire fields and hunts into dusk, each pack to pick a bead of attention, each border a hedge trimmed true to its promise. Even their silence felt orderly, like fog that refuses drama. Far south, where limestone walls keep the sun's last sip and courtyards teach fountains to speak, silk lay on the loom like an obedient rumor of water. Italian workshops loved the play between shadow and blaze. I saw drawboys step lightly, raising pattern cords in a ritual that resembled the opening of a garden gate. Satin spread as if night had been polished. Velvet grew soft orchards under the palm, the pile of velvet dusk that remembered the caress. Dyers there bartered with light itself. Gold-toned welds, madder deep as wine, indigo that pretended to be sky indoors. Colors entered the threads and learned to glow without argument. In such cloth, movement becomes language. A sleeve turning says river. A hem in candlelight says fruit at noon. Across the sea-salted channel, hills rolled like the backs of drowsing ewes, and the wind had a habit of knocking at doors. There the loom met wool that loved to comfort. English hands spun yarn with a memory of lanolin still inside it, and the weave welcomed the fuller's thunder. Broadcloth, once plain as bread, came from the mill richer, denser, fit to shoulder weather on behalf of a whole village. Teasels raised a nap that kept the day's warmth like a pocket flask. Seams settled with the contentment of a settled hearth. The colors leaned toward hedge and heath. Greens with a mind to brown, reds that remembered clay, blues as moderate as the northern sky. Thus the regions spoke. Tightness, sheen, warmth. Each was a dialect, and the body, traveling, learned them all. Long before the eye has chosen its meanings, the nose has already read the room. I have stood in doorways and known the story by the air alone, for cloth keeps a memory of every hand and house it has touched. A wool cloak laid by the hearth learns smoke as a prayer learns repetition. Oak if the valley is wooded, peat if the moor is near, birch where winters are glass bright. The smoke climbs into the nap and becomes a portable dusk, the kind that comforts even beneath the noon sun. From workshops, other perfumes travel. New linen carries a clean, watery hush. Stones and stream and the faintest echo of Redding ponds tamed by many rinsings. Pressed smooth with glass or beetled under rhythmic blows, it retains a whisper of the board's wooden cool. Wool remembers lanolin like a kindness. When warmed by the body, it breathes a mild, animal sweetness, honest as pasture after rain. Dyers trail their seasons. Woad leaves a dark green shadow in the air. Weld suggests hay lofts and sun. Madder speaks from the root with an earthy warmth that is almost bred. In houses where care is a daily rite, garments sleep among herbs. I have opened chests and been met by lavender's purple sigh, by rosemary's brisk fidelity, by sweet bay and little coins of orris root tucked into linen as if to teach it patience. Cedar planks lend their quiet medicine, keeping moths at the respectful distance of a church door. Keys and pouches knock against belts above such chests, and the whole room wears the calm authority of a well-tended life. There are sharper notes, too, softened by time. Tallow lingers in thread waxed for obedient stitching. It warms beneath the seamstress's palm and leaves a candle's ghost behind. Soap cured in kitchen speaks of ash and fat and rainwater filtered through last year's snow. A vinegar rinse, used by the prudent to settle dyes, drifts faintly like an admonition that has already been forgiven. Feast days write their own incense into sleeves. Beeswax, frankincense, a windfall of candle smoke, while weekdays tuck away humbler scents. Straw from market baskets, bruised mint from a path unhurriedly walked. Even labor has its heraldry. Leather shoes wake the nose with oak bark tannin and road dust. A fisherman's cloak brings the salt's dry arithmetic. A fuller's apron remembers the mill's cool thunder. Yet all these notes, gathered and softened by breath and weather, learn to speak together. I have felt a room grow quieter a heartbeat before a person entered it, as their garments announced them. Hearth and herb, work and worship, the places they have been and the care that keeps them. Thus clothed, a life arrives already half understood, and the first word need not hurry. Before garments declare their intentions to the street, there is a quieter beginning. I have watched a woman lift a chemise from a chest and shake it once, a white breath unfolding. I have watched a man draw his shirt over shoulders still damp from the basin. Linen greets the body like a cool page, ready to take the ink of hours without complaint. It is the first line in the sentence of a day. Cut from rectangles with the thrift of wisdom, these undergarments waste little and forgive much. Gussets sit like blessings at the armpit where strain would otherwise speak too loudly. Gores fall modestly from hip to hem, giving the step a little wind. Necklines gather on a drawstring or lie plain as a quiet oath. Cuffs close with a tie or a narrow button knotted from thread, no metal needed. Seams are felled flat so that nothing sharp troubles the skin. I run my fingers along such stitching and feel the calm patience of hands that learn to measure with breath as well as with cord. Linen listens. It receives the salt of labor, the smoke of hearths, the secret census of a life lived close to its tasks. In bleaching fields it returns to a tempered brightness, laid out with others like a flock that has found a river. Washwomen work the river's edge with a rhythm older than scolding and song. Soaping with ash-laden lie, lifting, beating on stones that know more confessions than parish ledgers. Sun and wind finish the sermon. Later, the cloth will be folded with a sprig of lavender, orris, or rosemary if the season allows, and the chest will close on a breath made of fields. There is love in these plain garments. Initials sewn small in red thread near the hem so a laundress can marry shirt to owner again. A repair so neat the cloth seems to have forgiven its own weakness. A narrow edging stitched by candlelight when eyes were young. Whiteness, too, has its soft morality. Not the brittle glare of display, but a maintained decency. Clean enough to speak of care, quiet enough to avoid boasting. When outer layers change with weather or occasion, linen remains, steady as the undersong in a psalm. It cools the heated, calms the irritated, slides easily beneath wool and silk like a polite river under a bridge. I have felt the day begin rightly when linen meets skin. A hush, a small vow, the sense that whatever else is written above it, the first page was laid smooth and true. I have watched morning begin at the level of the knee, where modesty and motion first make their truce. A man reaches for his brays, humble linen, square-cut with a wisdom that wastes little, and steps into them as one steps into a pool at first light. The cloth is cool and obliging. A drawstring gathers the waist, not as a boast but as a quiet agreement. Hold me, and I will hold you. The fall of the fabric is a modest curtain for the hours to come, the first privacy of the day. Then the hose, twin rivers rising from foot to thigh, sometimes cut as two long promises, sometimes joined later by a narrow bridge of cloth. I have felt the grain of that wool against the palm, springy as meadow, ready to follow muscle and bone without complaint. Each leg learns the shape it serves, pulling smooth along the calf where walking writes its tireless script. The heel remembers cobbles, the toe remembers dust. The knee keeps a gentle gloss from bending often in greeting, work, or prayer. There is a small ceremony at the waist where everything must learn to speak together. Points wait like patient phrases, narrow cords tipped with a bit of metal or hardened thread, each one an intention tied to a place. Through eyelet and loop they pass, yoking hose to braise, sometimes hose to doublet later, so that the whole attire hangs from the body not as a weight but as a considered music. I have admired the order of it. Ties evenly spaced as if by stars, knots drawn firm yet kind, ready to answer the day without protest. To untie them at night is to unstring a lute, letting the instrument return to silence. Beneath public gaze this lattice remains unseen, yet it governs carriage and comfort. A well-set point prevents a blush of exposure when a stride lengthens. Another eases the pull of fabric when a rider throws a leg across the saddle. Even the smallest cord speaks of forethought, of care taken in private so that composure may walk safely among others. Women, too, know the kindness of ties. Garters soft as a promise, ribbons that do not bite, laces that allow the body to breathe and bend. Laundry days teach these pieces their humility again. Brays blanch in river light. Hose are turned inside out to dry, their shape lifted back by wind as if an invisible walker passed along the green. Points coil like sleeping minnows in a bowl, to be retipped or replaced. For cords and lives both fray where they are most faithful. When all is mended and put by, the chest closes on a tender order. Linen folded, wool rolled, ties coiled. Quiet instruments ready for the next performance of the day. After linen has written the first cool sentence against the skin, the day asks for substance. I have watched a woman lift her kirtle from a peg, the wool answering her hands with a quiet spring. It is cut with understanding rather than hurry, a body's map translated into cloth. Seams curve where ribs breathe, gores open from waist to hem so that walking becomes a measured bell of movement. The lacing side or front, spiral or ladder, draws the garment to the wearer as a baker draws dough to shape, firm without unkindness. Sleeves, narrow as thought, can unbutton or unlatch at the wrist. They roll to the elbow when water must be lifted or grain sifted, and they fall again when the hour turns public. Kirtle keeps faith with work. Its wool holds a day's warmth near the bones and gives back pliancy to bend and rise. I have seen an apron tied over it like a promise to keep clean what cannot spare time for vanity. Patches come later, neat as prayers, set where a bench has polished the seat, where a basket has worried the hip. Stitch by stitch, the garment learns its owner's life and carries it forward. For men, the doublet answers with a different grammar, shaped to the chest and shoulder as a sail is cut to wind. Sturdy stuff lines its heart, canvas or fustian, so that the outer cloth keeps a proper bearing. The neck stands modestly. The body fits close enough to be companionable with labor and still play host to breath. I have watched hands fasten the buttons, horn or cloth wrapped, each one a bead on the rosary of mourning. Seams are backstitched strong. Where strain is expected, a small wedge or hidden gusset waits like a kindly thought. The skirts are short or long by custom, sometimes split to make room for the stride of a rider, sometimes straight to keep the air from mischief. Both garments are honest about what they can do. The kirtle bears baskets, cradles infants, leans against door frames to share a word. The doublet shoulders tools, steadies ladders, and takes the print of a hand wiped clean. At dusk, when the village exhales, I have seen the kirtle shed its apron and smooth itself for neighborly talk. I have seen the doublet brushed with a palm and sweetened with a sprig of herb tucked at the throat. Neither pretends to finery, yet both carry a width of dignity that needs no witness. Thus the day stands well supplied. Linen as first thought, then these companions. One that pours, one that braces, both firm as bread, both honest as morning. When the morning has gathered itself into purpose, the body steps outward to be read. I have watched a coat-hardy lifted from its peg, the cloth remembering shoulders as a book remembers a favorite thumb. It is the garment where form begins to speak in clauses. A close body, sleeves that taper like careful thought, buttons marching in a quiet procession from wrist to throat. Those buttons, dozens sometimes, are the punctuation of the hour, each fastening a small pause, each closing the day's sentence against stray weather. The waist draws in not as a boast but as a clear subject. The skirt falls in measured pleats, phrases of movement that keep time with the stride. For women, the coat-hardy can be a second skin of decision, laced where privacy and region decree. Side for modesty, front for ease, back for help from trusted hands. For men, it rides closer still, the sleeve set so true that a lifted arm does not trouble the line. I have seen a tailor's hand trace the sigh with reverence, knowing that here grammar becomes destiny. A good armhole allows a life to reach, to lift, to greet without tearing the sentence it wears. Over this inner eloquence floats the surcoat, outer speech shaped by season and station. Sometimes it opens at the sides like generous quotation marks, heraldic fields displayed where a breeze can read them. Sometimes it is a sleeveless river, narrowing at the shoulder, pouring to the ground with the gravity of doctrine. In colder lands it grows sleeves like bell mouths, catching the wind's remarks and softening them. I have trailed my fingers along its edges bound in silk or guarded by fur, and felt how boundary turns to invitation when trimmed with care. Silhouette is meaning. A narrow torso framed by a flared skirt says readiness. A long, unstressed fall says leisure. A belt worn high gathers the body into prayer. A belt dropped low admits a music of hips. I have watched the street translate these shapes without thinking. A craftsman's coat hardy, close and honest, declares the owner's hour belongs to labor. A noble surcoat, long as afternoon, declares there is time to spare. Time to grant, time to refuse. Colors add their adverbs. Sober browns and leaf shadows for those who keep accounts with weather. Jeweled blues and reds where power keeps accounts with people. At dusk, when candles turn doorways into small theaters, the coat-hardy and surcoat play their parts again. Buttons are unfastened like thoughts set free. A clasp is loosed, and the room breathes. Yet even folded on a chair, these garments keep their syntax. I have seen a silhouette sleeping in cloth, a sentence at rest, ready to rise at dawn and speak the body into the world once more. I have seen a life told by the arm's small theater, where cloth meets pulse and work turns to gesture. Sleeves are where the day first reveals itself. In quiet houses they button narrow and plain, ready to lift a bucket, knead bread, bless a child's brow. In halls where light has time to linger, they lengthen and open like patient bells, letting a hand arrive as if from a story. Yet most eloquent are the sleeves that come and go, the ones laced on at dawn, unlaced at dusk, detachable like thoughts that may be changed without unseaming the heart. A chest may hold more sleeves than gowns, for wrists invite variety the way a window invites weather. I have watched a woman match her day by fastening wool for market, velvet for feast, linen for heat, all to the same honest bodice. Eyelets wait along the armhole like small ears, points thread through them with deliberate kindness. The seam sits true and the sleeve learns its duty. Later, when coin runs thin, sleeves go to market like negotiators. I have seen a pear traded for flour, pawned for winter wood, redeemed when fortune softened her mouth again. A gown without sleeves looks like a sentence missing its verb. Yet even then, the promise remains, for sleeves can be borrowed from a cousin, a neighbor, a season. In tourney fields, favors drifted from galleries to lances, the light kiss of a ribbon, the grave weight of a lady's sleeve. I have watched a knight ride with that pledge bound at the elbow, the cloth moving like a visible vow. In doorways, too, shy tokens travel. A cuff embroidered with initials traded in the hush after vespers. A narrow band worked with rosemary stitched along a hem in secret, so that the beloved's wrist will remember a garden. Guilds speak at the wrist as well. I have traced tiny marks on a cuff's reverse, a weaver's sign or tailor's flourish in thread the color of discretion. Proofs that hands of oath shaped what hands of daily labor would wear. There is humility in rolling a sleeve when water asks to be lifted, and there is ceremony in letting it fall again for evening. Stains write their quiet footnotes. Wine from a harvest blessing, wax from a candle guarded through a windy lane, blue from a vat visited at dawn. Patches appear where elbows rest on ledgers or on knees beside a crying child. Thus the wrist becomes a hinge between promise and deed. I have stood where sleeves brushed one another in passing and heard their gentle grammar. Borrowed, given, earned, forgiven. Each touch a small clause in the long sentence of a life. I have stood in small rooms at first light and watched the hour declare itself by the direction of the laces. Where the body fastens, the world reads. A front opening speaks of self-reliance. Fingers finding their way from hem to throat, tug by patient tug, the day drawn closed without witness. A back opening requires trust. I have seen a husband's hands learn that gentle craft, or a sister's or a maid's. Pulling evenly so breath and bearing are both respected. Side lacings are quieter still, nestled beneath the arm where talk is infrequent and work is frequent. Merciful to mothers who must nurse, kind to those whose bodies change with harvest and winter. Eyelets make the path. Pierced cleanly through layers of cloth and guarded with stitching, they are little mouths that refuse to fray into gossip. When set close and offset, they favor the spiral. A single cord threading like a river that knows one bank better than the other, drawing edges to overlap so modesty is kept. I have traced that spiral and felt how it lays the garment down into the wearer, smoothing small gaps as a hand smooths anxious hair. Ladder lacing, cross upon cross, has its own honesty. Two rows facing each other like neighbors over a fence, but it can open little windows where the day insists. Some prefer that candor. Some prefer the hush of the spiral. Aglets tip the cords, metal or hardened thread, small spears that part the weave without cruelty. Knots rest where they will not bruise. Low if a belt will hide them, high if a collar will. I have watched a woman turn, feeling for evenness the way a miller feels for grind between finger and thumb. Too tight and the ribs argue. Too loose and the hour looks undecided. A good lacing allows laughter, work, and prayer with equal grace. Custom draws its own map. In some towns, married women favor back lacings, a quiet confession that trusted help dwells in the house. Maidens keep to the front for privacy's sake. In others, only feast garments fasten behind, making a ceremony of preparation. Men's doublets learn the same grammar in bolder strokes, their points and laces visible yet still demure, a stewardship of movement rather than display. At day's end, laces unlearn their duties. Cords coil like resting snakes. Eyelets sigh their relief. I have heard the softened rasp as knots are eased, and felt the room widen around the unfastened body. Modesty, like cloth, is not the hiding of form but the measured choosing of when and how it speaks. Here, at these stitched thresholds, the body writes that choice in quiet script. I have stood in doorways where light arrived like soft water and watched the face choose its weather. A veil is the gentlest climate a woman may summon. A slip of linen or silk that cools the brow, dims the blaze of hair, and teaches the gaze to move more slowly. Pinned at the temples with little stars of metal, it trembles when a thought passes, a sail acknowledging an inner wind. In market lanes the veil keeps dust from the mouth. In churches it gathers devotion into a quiet shade. I have seen a girl's veil bright as milk, the hem still speaking of a mother's iron. And I have seen an elder's veil softened by years, its edge as tender as breath upon glass. The wimple is a river taught to circle the shore. Linen washed to virtue, winds under the chin and over the throat, a modesty that warms as well as guards. It is a garment of vows and households. Wives who wish to declare steadiness, widows who would lay brightness by, sisters whose lives bend toward prayer. Pin by pin, the face becomes a small chapel, the voice entering it with calm. Starch gives the cloth a contemplative courage. The hands that shape its curves know the arithmetic of folds by heart. I have traced the line where wimple meets veil and felt a border both tender and resolute, like the margin of a psalm. Then there are the hennins, those measured astonishments that make the skull a tower and the day a pageant. Some rise to a disciplined cone, some close the sky brusquely with a blunt crown. From their tips a veil pours like moonlight taught to fall in a straight line. Worn at court, they turn corridors into avenues and steps into proclamations. I have watched a lady pass, her chin lengthened by the line, her neck a swan's intention, the veil drawing a pale geometry through the air behind her. Pins hold the architecture together. Quiet nails in a thoughtful house, and a fillet or circlet steadies the brow so that dignity does not slip. Hair is the first herald of the heart, and these garments edit its speech. Loose hair is a meadow. Bound hair is a garden with a gate. A maiden lets a hint escape, bright under linen like fruit beneath leaves. A bride veils radiance to teach desire patience. A widow gathers every brightness in, and the cloth speaks for her. Not absence, but reverent keeping. To lift a veil, to pin a wimple, to set a hennin true is to draw a horizon upon the body. Near when the day asks for privacy, far when ceremony requires distance, and to let the face sail upon it with chosen grace. I have stood in thresholds and known who kept the house by the music of their steps. Belts make such music. Leather taught to remember a waist, silk woven in patient tablets, will bound firm with a weaver's little pride, each bearing its ornaments like minor bells of intention. A buckle answers with a sober click. Mounts glimmer like small, obedient stars. The belt's tongue slides through with the ease of a familiar prayer, and what hangs from it announces rank more surely than a loud voice ever could. At the hip, power finds a practical form. A ring of keys speaks first. Cellar, pantry, chest, coffer, still room, door. I have felt their cool weight in a matron's hand, the iron warmed by generations of tasks. When she walks, they chime a measured authority. No boast, only the reminder that bread and linens, candles and spices, pass through her keeping. A steward's keys have a different cadence, barns and granaries, gates and locks that measure out a village's winter. Children learn those sounds the way birds learn weather. Pouches keep quieter counsel. A soft leather scrip rests against the thigh with the whisper of stored intentions. A few coins rubbed smooth by hope, a tally stick, a sealing matrix that carries a man's brief certainty in wax. I have found inside such bags a twist of salt, a pilgrim badge, a folded scrap of a saint's day image, a needle wrapped in wool against loss. Some pouches breathe herb, lavender to rebuke moths, rosemary to freshen reckoning, so that accounts smell faintly of gardens. From belts also hang the small instruments of decency. A knife fit for bread, its sheath oiled and quiet. A housewife or chatelaine, bright with useful charms. Pincushion, bodkin, thimble, a tiny spoon for spices. Beads for patience, slipping grain by grain beneath the fingers while the pot simmers and the door waits for a familiar knock. In courts, the girdle becomes a narrow procession of metal and silk, mounts stamped with leaf and beast, ends tipped with tassels that touch the air like soft punctuation. Even then, usefulness whispers beneath finery. A pomander winks among the links, carrying citrus, clove, or rose to steady crowded hours. Belts teach posture. Drawn snug, they gather will at the center and send it outward to limb and errand. Loosened at dusk, they invite breath to widen and the day to release its grip. I have watched a woman hang her keys on a peg and the room relax, as if the house, recognizing its keeper's rest, let its shoulders sink a little. Thus the hip becomes a herald. What we bear, we belong to. What we carry, we become. And the household learns our measure by the small, beloved music we wear. I have stood at shop doors where leather breathed like a quiet animal, and watched the day begin at ground level. A cobbler's bench is a low altar, awls bright as little thorns, waxed thread obedient under the fingers, bristles tamed to carry the stitch. Lasts wait. Wooden feet that do not tire, while oak bark hides, mellow as late tea, are coaxed into shape. Turned inside out and sewn close, a shoe learns humility first. Then, with a twist like birth, it is turned again, righted, and the seam hides its virtue between soul and world. Tallow rubs in with the heel of a palm. The leather darkens as if it has remembered rain. Shoes speak softly of their owners. Work favors a round toe and a stout strap, something that forgives puddles and long errands. Court answers with a longer thought at the tip, a smile of leather pointing past the foot toward an imagined distance. Buckles wink, latchets tie modest knots. Children's shoes curl up at the edges from games the street will not confess in words. I have lifted a worn pair and read its story. The left worn thin at the outer edge by a habitual lean, the right darkened by the stirrup's daily counsel, both carrying dust from lanes that keep no ledger but remember every footfall. Then come pattens, the raised argument with mud, which shaped to the footprint, shod with an iron ring or crosspiece, strapped over the shoe like a thoughtful raft. They lift the wearer a measured finger's breadth above the world's moist intentions. I have heard their talk on cobbles, a tempered clack, not unkind, announcing that hems will stay almost tidy, reputations cleaner than the road deserves. Market mornings love patents. Fishmonger and housewife, clerk and midwife step high through spilt water, cabbage leaves, winter's leftover decisions. Skirts do not drink what the street would offer. Linen saves its whiteness for the privacy of home. There is courtesy in removing patents at a threshold. I have seen them left in porches like small wooden animals awaiting their master's return. So floors may keep the hush of prayer and polished oak go unscarred. Inside, the shoe alone continues, softer, nearer to the weave of rushes and the warmth of hearth. Repair is the shoe's confession and absolution. Pegs replace stitches where haste is needed. New soles receive the old uppers the way a kind friend lends an arm. Grease returns suppleness to leather, and the evening lamp makes the polish glow like a kept promise. Thus the foot, that modest pilgrim, finds its dignity. Raised a little above the mire, it learns to cross the day without borrowing stain, and the body walks on in quiet trust, preserved by thoughtful inches from the world's untidy honesty. I have watched light choose its loyalties upon a person, catching first at the throat, then at the hand, then at the shy sway of a girdle mount. Jewels are small sons we borrow for a time, teaching them to rise and set upon our bodies. A brooch fastens more than cloth. It arrests chance, bids a fold behave, and gives the eye a star to rest upon. I have seen enamel like sweet fruit, gold filigree as delicate as frost on a chapel pane, pearls that keep the hush of a shell within their milk. Rings speak more closely still. A posy hidden inside the hoop keeps its vow against the finger's pulse. words worn to thin softness by warmth and washing, yet remembered whenever the hand turns to bread or blessing. Beneath brightness travels belief. At the neck, a reliquary lies with a weight that is not only metal. A thread from a martyr's robe, a splinter said to have known a rood, a saint's dust folded into wax and silk. These are carried not as proofs but as companionships. I have felt the air alter around such things, the wearer walking a little steadier, as if a lane had been leveled. Pilgrim signs add their homelier courage, shells bright with road salt, tin badges hammered thin with a bishop's crook or a saint's face, ampullae that once held holy water and now hold only memory. Sewn to hat or hood, they make a litany that needs no voice. Stones keep their old opinions. Coral reddens like a dawn and is asked to guard infants and fever. Jet drinks light and is trusted to swallow envy. Amber keeps a trapped summer and warms against the skin until it smells faintly of honey and pine. Garnet carries a hearth in its darkness. Rock crystal remains the conscience of the jewel box, clear as a good thought. I have watched a grandmother fasten a bit of red wool at a baby's wrist, a hedge against the world's careless glance, and I have watched a sailor tie 3 knots in a cord before sailing, then stitch the cord into his cap so that luck must follow his thoughts to sea. There are prayers that never meet the sun. In hems and facings, initials bloom in the discreet red of lifeblood. A tiny cross hides at the nape where only fingers that love will find it. I have traced alphabets marched along a lining as if letters themselves could keep order. I have found a coin sewn under an insole to persuade the road toward mercy. Even scent serves as adornment and petition. Rosemary sprigs tucked in a bodice for remembrance. A pomander at the belt where clove and citrus set a small, bright weather around the wearer. Thus adorned, the body does not grow louder. It grows legible. Little sons attend it, relics steady it, charms accompany it like quiet friends who do not need to be introduced. And beneath the glitter, thread keeps saying its patient prayer, knot by knot, stitch by stitch, so that what shines upon the surface is anchored to something kindly and deep. I have walked markets where color arrived like weather, and I have watched certain hues behave as if they carried heralds before them. Cloth is a kind of voice, and there were seasons when the town fathers, the guild elders, and the church all tried to correct its pronunciation. Laws were written as fences made of words. This fur for these shoulders, this silk for these halls, this shade only for those who could hear their names spoken in stone. Blue, when coaxed from humble woad, could belong to many, but the deep ocean thought of it, the kind that required returns to the vat beyond patience, was costly, and so the law suggested moderation. Red, if born of matter, warmed the common table, yet red driven toward the heart's true ember by dearer arts began to speak too loudly for a plowman's purse. There were purples that behaved like dusk and purples that behaved like authority. The latter were not for everyday breath. I have seen a reeve's hand test a sleeve and then his eyes rise from the cloth to the wearer's face, measuring whether dye and destiny matched. Some rules spoke in fibers rather than colors. Silk, with its private moonlight, was often guarded. A hem or a lining conceded to those who worked with their hands, while a full garment asked permission from rank. Velvet, a small orchard of pile, was rationed by width and occasion, as if the day itself must earn such softness. Fur followed winter's ladder. Lamb and coney for most, squirrel for those with offices to warm, sable and marten for a handful whose names traveled farther than their feet. Trains were measured like rivers, permitted to flow behind certain figures and required to dry up behind others. Pearls were counted as if they were prayers. Gold on the cap was weighed not only in coin but in the right to glimmer. Enforcement was a quieter theater. Wardens walked as weather vanes of propriety. Tailors kept their counsel, for scissors know many secrets. Dyers learned to temper brilliance so a citizen might shine without inviting rebuke. And yet the heart loves brightness. I have seen a bride in a small village wear a ribbon almost too blue, and I have watched the law look away for an afternoon, persuaded by laughter and bread and bells. These boundaries were never only about coin. They were about the story a town told itself. Cloth was asked to repeat that story faithfully. Who bore responsibility, who bore hope, who bore both. And still, beneath the rules, A sleeve would sometimes catch light, and in that brief flame the human wish would show itself, to be seen not as greater, but as fully as one is. I have stood in castle yards at dawn when the day sorted itself into colors. Men gathered in little knots, gray with frost, bright with expectation, and a steward moved among them with folded bundles. Livery is a promise made visible, a tunic or coat that borrows the Lord's hues, a sleeve that learns to carry another's will. I watched red and white divide the mist like banners of sunrise. I watched blue with a bar of gold turn a handful of strangers into a household that could be counted. Cloth wages speak in seasons rather than days. A winter coat with the right lining is coin against weather. A summer livery, light and well-cut, spends itself in shade and ease. Badges fastened at the breast declare the narrower truth. This stag for one hall, that knot of thorns for another. Devices hammered thin in pewter or stitched in careful silk. A retainer lifts his chin as the pin settles. The metal is cool, the meaning warm. Under such marks, men find each other in markets and on roads, and a quarrel knows where to stop because colors remember oaths when tempers forget. Not all livery is loud. Some lives wear allegiance like a low flame, a ribbon at the cap, a hose of the right shade, a modest band at the sleeve's mouth. In towns where guilds keep order, I have seen companies walk like moving parterres. Dyers in their sober greens, mercers with a discreet sheen, fishmongers with a glint like scales when the sun is in the mood. Feast days make gardens of streets, and the mayor's chain throws a measured constellation across the breast of local authority. Yet even then there is a hush beneath the show. Men and women stepping together because work has taught them a shared breath. There is the other side, too, where a sleeve becomes employ in the hush of a doorway. A youth of good hands and uncertain fortune is given a coat that fits a little large, as if to invite his future to grow inside it. He learns the pace of the gait, the silence of the stare, the name of the dog who knows all secrets. In the pocket, if pockets are granted, he keeps a folded scrap with the house's colors pricked in thread, a private badge he touches when doubt wanders near. I have seen cast-off liveries find second lives. Turned, patched, the badge unpicked, then worn by a cousin to market, the ghost of allegiance still glimmering in the nap. Colors travel farther than orders. A sleeve, once taught to belong, carries the habit of steadiness even when the pin is gone. Thus cloth binds not only bodies to masters, but strangers to one another, reminding the street that we are, for a while, each other's company. I have stood at basins where dawn made a mirror of tin, and watched a life declare itself with a comb. Hair is the first garment and the last, woven by sleep, loosened by rain, braided by hope. A maiden's hair often lives like a meadow, parted by paths of ribbon, plaited in 2 rivers down the back, or let to fall on feast days as if light had learned to pour from a brow. Mothers oil the ends with a whisper of rosemary, and brush until the strands lie like evening water. The sound of those strokes is a lullaby older than houses. Marriage sets a gate in that meadow. On the morning after vows, hair learns enclosure, not as punishment but as a garden learns a wall. A coif sits first, white as a kept promise, its ties meeting under the ear with a kiss of thread. Over it, a veil or hood settles like calm weather. I have watched newly wedded hands grow deft with pins, pinning not only cloth but the day's gravity in place. In fields and kitchens, a single tendril may stray and be forgiven. At church and market, the brow becomes a small horizon, sheltering eyes that need not be read by strangers. Widowhood draws the line farther inward. Hair is braided away, tucked as if into memory, the veil darkened to teach the world to lower its voice. I have seen a widow's fingers find the edge of her covering and pause there, the way one touches a closed door that still remembers a beloved step. The cloth does not erase brightness. It keeps it banked, like coals under ash that warm a whole night without flame. In time, some light returns. A lighter veil, a softer edge, but the hand that pins it remembers the lesson of absence and presence made gentle. Vows write other alphabets. Monks offer the crown of the head to humility, the tonsure a small, lucid moon where pride may spend its fever. Nuns bind hair beneath wimple and veil so thoroughly that only voice and gaze are left to speak, and these grow eloquent in the quiet. I have watched a novice kneel while scissors clicked like patient birds, locks falling into a shallow basket, later buried in the garden where mint would eventually rise. Every household keeps its implements of this governance. Boxwood comb with missing teeth, a horn pinned smooth as a river stone, a length of ribbon that remembers laughter. Vinegar brightens a shine. Rain writes its own parting and is humored. Thus the head becomes a small chapel of intention. By the fall of a strand, the world reads maiden, wife, or widow. By the veil's horizon, it learns how close it may come. I have stood at thresholds where joy stepped out and silence stepped in, and I have felt the air grow respectful of a darker cloth. Mourning begins with the hand that reaches, hesitates, and then chooses the plain. Jewels rest. Bright hems return to the chest like birds recalled from a storm. What comes forward is wool without boast, linen without gleam, colors lowered to the pitch of rain. Black as a shuttered room, gray as a road after carts, brown with the humility of soil. Even needlework grows quieter, a border of small crosses tucked against the edge like whispered prayers. There is a weight to such garments beyond their thread. I have watched a widow bind her veil, the cloth falling like evening around her face. The knot is learned once and then remembered by the body. Fingers find it in the dim and tighten it without thought. Children are dressed in sobriety they do not yet understand. Little sleeves that teach them to walk softly for a while. In some places a ribbon is tied at the arm, in others the hood is drawn farther forward, and the town reads the sign and lowers its own voice. Bread is salted, chairs are put straighter, and the week measures itself by the slow pendulum of visits and prayers. Penance speaks in a sterner fabric. I have seen hair shirts lifted from pegs with a wince of acceptance. Horsehair or rough hemp, the weave like a field of small thistles. Against the skin it tells truths that comfort would smooth away. Sackcloth is kin to that honesty, a coarse companion that refuses to flatter. Ash marks the brow, then falls to collar and cuff, and the day learns to proceed under the sign of amendment. Belts are exchanged for cords. Shoes lose their polish or give way to bare feet on certain roads. A pilgrim's habit keeps to the weather's palate and carries only what a long asking requires. Staff, scrip, badge, and a stubborn hope. Churches receive these garments with an understanding older than stone. I have watched a penitent kneel while a shawl of undyed wool was laid upon the shoulders like a plain benediction, and I have watched it later removed when the season of correction had done its quiet work. Mourning, too, has its long measure, weeks that turn to months, then soften. The veil lightens. A stitch of white returns at the throat. A ribbon remembers how to be blue. Nothing is forgotten. The cloth keeps the echo even when it brightens, as seashells keep the sound of long waves long after the tide has gone. I have entered churches at the blue edge of morning, when stone still keeps the night's last breath, and I have watched sanctity gather itself by means of linen and wool. Vestments are not costumes. They are ways of teaching the body to move as prayer moves, measured, inwardly bright, obedient to an older grammar than haste. First comes the alb, white as a kept promise. I have seen it lifted from a press where lavender stood guard, its linen cool with the memory of water. Drawn over the head, it falls like forgiveness to the ankle, narrow sleeves calming the hands. A girdle cords the waist, not to restrain but to gather, as a river gathers its banks. Sometimes an amice settles around the shoulders, a hood-like square that tames the world's drafts and the hearts, a small rampart of cloth against distraction. Colors take their turn like seasons upon a tree. I have watched green speak of steady growth, violet bend toward repentance, red flare for martyr and spirit, white keep feast with a bell's bright ring. Over the alb, the stole hangs, narrow river of authority crossing the body's compass, a reminder that words soon to be spoken will not be merely one voice's errand. Then the chasuble answers if the day asks for it. A wide bell of fabric, front and back like pages of a great book, orphrey bands written upon them with saints and vines, the whole garment teaching the arms to open slowly, as if to bless even the air. There are other labors of holiness. The deacon wears the dalmatic, striped with kindness, its sleeves urging service into readiness. A cope spreads like a traveling sky, clasped at the throat where a brooch keeps the day from wandering. Under its arch a procession becomes a shoreline of order. And in cloisters the cowl holds long patience. Hood and mantle in one, the wool heavy enough to keep thought close, the hem counting the turns of the ambulatory like a rosary taught to breathe. In sacristies, quiet industry tends these garments the way a gardener tends espaliers. Hands mend an orphrey thread by thread. Fragrance is kept modest and clean. Folds are taught to lie as water lies in a carved channel. When incense rises later and bells answer in small silver voices, the vesture does not compete. It steadies. Cloth learns to carry light without boasting, shadow without gloom. I have seen a priest lift his sleeves for the blessing and the chasuble move like dawn across stone, and for a breath the church remembered. Sanctity is not a blaze but a drape, teaching gravity to fall gently about the soul. I have walked into cloth halls when morning still clung to the rafters and the air kept a mingled hymn of lanolin, chalk, and rush matting. Light fell in long panes, and benches waited like sober jurors. Here trade learned to speak clearly. Bales were opened like loaves. Edges were shaken out so that threads could tell their story without boasting. A hush of reckoning followed, the kind that respects both bread at home and honesty abroad. Measures stood ready, not as tyrants but as guardians. Wands lay burnished by generations of palms, each mark rubbed smooth by argument and agreement. Some towns kept their own length with local pride, yet the rod itself did not lie. Set to selvage, lifted, set again, it asked the cloth to keep faith with its first promise. I have watched a merchant let a breath hang, reading the fall for truth. I have seen a warden slide a narrow rule under a folded end to catch a stolen finger's breadth. Where width was pledged, tenterhooks had already taught obedience. Now length must also answer. Fingers judge what eyes might flatter. A wetted thumb walked the nap, and where it paused it left a faint whirl of chalk. A human seal, small as a blessing. I liked that sign, for it meant a person had listened with skin, not numbers only. Shears snipped a thread near the edge, testing strength with a polite tug. If the cloth sang true, neither brittle nor slack, the price would follow in measured steps. Seals and tickets completed the rite. Lead marks bit gently at the selvage, naming town and guild. Parchment tags carried the hand of a scribe who had learned to keep his flourishes modest in matters of coin. Wrapping cloth, cord, and a final splash of wax closed the bargain. I have seen the warm flat of a signet lay its brief moon upon that pool, and the bale became the ambassador of a roof and a river, ready for roads salt bright or dust brown. There were cautions. Wardens slit suspicious hems to see whether sand or shot had been taught to masquerade as weight. They frowned at false selvages stitched on to feign breadth. They scolded overfulled stubbornness that sacrificed drape to density. Yet correction was a craft as well, meant to restore rather than shame. A fine paid into a common box might mend a widow's roof. A public apology made the hall's air cleaner. Fairness, in the end, was a habit of touch. The thumbprint on wool, the true rod, the seal honestly bitten. These were the town's quiet sacraments, by which bread and trust both rose. I have walked streets where color turned into a boundary and a hat brim became a small decree. Cloth, which can warm and honor, was sometimes asked to sort souls. A council met, voices level as ledgers, and the edict went forth. This people shall wear such a mark. These others shall keep to this hue. Here a badge at the shoulder, there a hat of a certain crown. I have watched the needle obey with downcast patience, stitching not only thread to cloth but rule to skin. Some signs were born from within, chosen like a shared candle. Pilgrim's shells worn in fellowship, a brotherhood's cord at the waist, a scholar's gown that let learning find its own. But there were seasons when difference was named by those outside it, and a circle or stripe, a ring or patch, taught the eye to stop before it listened. I remember a morning when a market moved a half step away from a man whose coat carried the town's command. I remember the evening when his neighbor carried bread across that line anyway, as if hunger were its own heraldry. There is a sorrow that clings to such garments, even when carefully kept. I have traced a badge that once shone and now lies dull in a chest. the pin bent by years, and I have felt the heaviness of being read before being greeted. Yet I have also seen defiance done softly. A seam strengthened so the mark will not tear free in a crowd. An edge bound neatly, insisting that even constraint may meet the day with dignity. Mothers taught their children how to wear what the town required without letting it eat the heart's brightness. Fathers mended, kissed foreheads, opened doors. The eye learns its habits from the hand. If the hand reaches, offering a seat, sharing a cup, the eye begins to see a person, not a sign. If the hand hesitates, the eye grows hasty and the street grows narrow. I have stood where two processions crossed, each bearing its differences like weather, and watched a moment tilt either way. A lifted chin could sharpen the air. A lowered one could turn it to rain that nourishes both fields. Cloth speaks, but it need not conclude. The ethics of seeing lives in the pause between glance and judgment. In that breath, a badge becomes smaller than a name, a color less than a voice. I have learned to linger there, and I invite the world to linger with me. Long enough to let a sleeve be only a sleeve, and a person step forward from behind it. I have walked roads that wore their own necklaces, wayside thorns hung with the cast-off cords of journeys done, hedges bright with scraps of ribbon weather had not yet persuaded to fade. Pilgrims move like beads upon a great rosary of earth, and their garments learn to speak the stations of their going. A hat becomes a little chapel. A cloak turns into a moving wall on which small testaments gleam. I have watched a shell ride the brim, white as a moon taught to rest by day, its ridges keeping the memory of many tides. I have seen pewter badges shine like rain in sunlight. Saints and swords, wheels and keys, crosses that had learned a dozen dialects of hope. At shrines, sellers sit like patient sextons of metal, heating thin discs and pressing them beneath dies carved with legends and faces. The air smells of tin and candle wax. Laughter thins as awe thickens. Coins pass, and a token changes hands with the gravity of water in dry country. Pinned at the breast or sewn to a hood, it says, I have stood where the story flowered. I have knelt where feet have worn a hollow in stone. I have carried my trouble there and left some of its weight behind. Amply dangle at the throat, once brimming with blessed liquid and now carrying only the scent of old miracles, which is to say, the courage to go on. On the road, signs are passports that customs of kindness recognize. A farmer seeing a shell will fetch a bowl without being asked. A gate will swing wider. A child will walk a little way beside the staff to hear a tale burnished by dust. When danger prowls, badges sometimes by mercy. When rain clings, they draw a stranger into a hearth's small parliament. I have seen midwives borrow a pilgrim token and lay it within a mother's palm. I have seen a dying man's hood heavy with years of journeys stitched there, as if he meant to take all his roads with him into the next country. Some tokens outlive their cloth. Melted for solder, they join roofs that keep whole winters at bay. Strung together, they make a quiet chain above a bed where sleeplessness has been instructed to behave. Children finger them and learn geography by miracle. Rivers, mountains, and mercies, all mapped in tin. Thus every lane becomes a litany, every milestone a verse, and the traveler, stitched with small brightness, walks within a moving prayer. I have stood in squares where morning bells sifted light onto stone, and watched a town dress its lesson. Sometimes the garment was made in haste from coarse linen, sometimes from wool that had forgotten comfort. Across the breast a sign would be painted or stitched, a loaf for theft, a broken ring for a vow undone, a key turned the wrong way for trust misused. The cloth did the speaking so that the mouth might be spared harsher words. A warden set the collar straight. An alderman read a few lines. The wearer met the day with lowered gaze and steady breath. There were caps, too tall, paper-bright mitres lettered with mischief, or hoods with ears sewn long in a jest too clear. I have heard the small bells some towns attached to such headgear, a thin chiming that tried to turn reproof into theater. The crowd's eyes gathered like birds on a wall. Some eyes were sharp, others thoughtful. Children craned. Elders remembered earlier seasons when their own feet had walked closer to such edges than they cared to admit. Churches kept gentler garments for correction. I have watched a penitent stand in a white sheet at the porch, the linen falling like an unfinished prayer. On certain roads, painted tunics were worn for a span of Sundays, their crosses and flames more emblem than wound, asking the passerby to accept amendment as a neighbor. The cloths themselves grew familiar in sacristies. Mended, folded, sometimes altered to a softer cut as decades turned judgment into warning and warning toward mercy. The line between spectacle and forgiveness is a narrow hem. I have seen a baker step from his stall and press a heel of bread into a shamed hand. I have seen a woman remove her own shawl and lay it over a tunic too thin for weather, readying the knot with a tenderness that rebuked the mourning more than any proclamation could. There were afternoons when a priest, meeting the eyes of the corrected, shortened the season by a week and told no one. Evenings when neighbors walked home beside the wearer, letting conversation rise like steam from bread until the cap's bells were only an afterthought. Cloth remembers what was asked of it. Later, I have found such garments cut down for cleaning rags, stitched into linings, or given to the poor once their signs were unpicked, an amnesty done with needle and time. Thus, even in the square's bright scrutiny, a second task waited, to teach the town that a life is more than its worst morning, and that the hand which steadies a trembling hem is already working the miracle it wishes to see. I have watched a house grow quiet before a wedding, as if the walls themselves were listening for footsteps yet to come. In that hush, cloth takes the first vows. Women gather around a long table where the light is honest, and linens are brought forward one by one. Sheets white as a paused breath, towels with borders of red that look like small, steady heartbeats, tablecloths that remember feasts not yet eaten. Each piece is lifted, shaken once to wake the weave, and laid down with the care given to a sleeping child. Counting is done aloud, slowly, so the number will learn to live in memory. One for daily kindness, one for high days, one to spare for lean seasons, one to give away when charity knocks. The list becomes a rosary of use. Needles speak their benedictions at the corners. Initials are worked in red thread near the hem, modest as a blush. A little cross rests at the head of a sheet where foreheads will one day find it in the dark. Hemstitching binds patience into the edges so that washing and years will not unravel what love began. Somewhere in the stack a small flaw is forgiven and placed near the middle, for perfection is a thing best kept on the far side of the next world. The chest waits with the patience of trees. Oak or cedar, bound with sober iron, it stands like a low, faithful guardian at the room's boundary. I have traced carvings that promise seasons, vine and bird, flower and star, as if to teach the future how to climb and sing. Inside, shavings whisper spice. Sprigs of lavender, rosemary, and bay make a quiet garden of the interior air. The first linens go in, then garments plain and good. Chemises measured to an honest life, a kirtle willing to work, a finer gown for feast, ribbons that know both modesty and joy. A belt lies coiled like a calm oath. Sometimes there is a veil folded with the gravity of cloud. Sometimes a length of cloth kept uncut, a bright possibility waiting for the right hour. Gifts arrive like small comets. A cousin's embroidered pillow, a neighbor's stout blanket, a godmother's piece of silver tucked in a corner to court prosperity. Keys are tied with a ribbon at the hasp and handed to the bride as if the whole house were kneeling. In the church, a cloth spreads over the joined hands, plain linen that glows like water, while friends fasten ribbons about the wrists, making grammar of union from color and cord. Later, when the new bed is blessed, curtains are drawn with a sound like rain on leaves, and the first sheet whispers beneath two breathing lives. Years will pass. Laundry days will ghost the green with bright flags of marriage. Mending will place discreet moons over the places most loved. And when a child is born or grief visits, the chest will open again, giving what it has kept. The cool consolation of linen, the steady courage of cloth that was counted like blessings and laid down with hope. I have risen with towns when the world is still the color of pewter and footsteps sound larger than their owners. Market morning begins with breath on the air and canvas creaking as stalls unfold like modest wings. Carts arrive with a rumble that settles the stone, and the square, sleepy as a cat, opens one eye and then the other. Cloth comes wrapped in itself, bales tied with rope that remembers salt and rain. Knives nick cords, knots huff, and suddenly the day has a fragrance. Lanolin from the hills, woad's green secrecy, a thread of vinegar where someone wise has set dye with prudence. The first light slides through awnings and writes pale rivers along Bolt and Skane. Merchants greet one another with the soft arithmetic of weight and measure. A bolt is unrolled as a baker opens his loaf. The crust crackles, the crumb reveals. So the weaver's promise is tested, selvage to selvage like a steady shore. The fall of the cloth read as a priest reads the turn of a page. Fingertips make their pilgrimage. Naps stroked both ways, linen pinched to hear its whisper, silk lifted to catch a private moon. I have watched buyers close their eyes to listen better with skin, for fairness often begins where sight would hurry. Haggling is a hymn with two melodies. The seller sings the work, the early dew, the long boil, the thunder of fulling, the nights spent cooling vats with one careful stir each hour. The buyer answers with bread and babies, with roofs that leak, with winter already leaning at the door. Between them their hands keep time. A thumb laid on a measure, two fingers marking the promised breadth, palms stating plainly what coin can bear. Laughter enters, withdraws, returns like a tolerant ant. A price is found that lets both households breathe. Around the square move the smaller theaters of necessity. A dyer holds a skein to the morning and squints. A tailor's boy shoulders a bundle of patterns cut from old parchment maps. A shepherd's cloak, still smelling of road and animal, is bartered for one newly fulled and stouter of heart. Children dart beneath trestles, their pockets gathering crumbs of marvel. Broken seals, a blue thread bright as a jay's feather, a wooden spool that will become a toy boat in a basin later. A bell from the church counts the hour, and birds rehearse their part above the awnings. By mid-morning the square is a woven thing, warp of stalls, weft of feet, the pattern changing with each negotiation. And when the sun climbs to honesty, bargains are tied off like neat knots, bales are bound again, and the day, folded, priced, and blessed, goes home across many shoulders. I have leaned over tables where chalk dust made a soft fog and watched a tailor draw a world from a rectangle. The cloth lies with the serenity of a pond. Into it the hand writes curves that the loom never knew it could become. Shears rest like patient swans, their beaks closed until the moment of truth. Measure, breath, and habit compose the music here. A sleeve head is a crescent of permission, a neckline a moon cut from shore, and between these shapes runs the old law: waste nothing that can be taught to serve. Gores are the tailor's gentle arguments with straightness. From waist to hem they open like careful wedges of daylight, granting stride and grace to what would otherwise march too narrowly. Placed fore and aft, or quartering a skirt like compass points, they persuade gravity to fall in pleats that remember rivers. Godettes are kin, smaller flares set like bells along a hem. They are laughter let in at the last moment, ease stitched into the hour where the foot must turn and the body wishes to sing. I have watched a hem grow from sober to companionable with the addition of a single bright triangle cut from what would have been swept from the floor. The pattern itself is an ethics. Narrow looms yield narrow widths, and so the cutter's art is a pilgrimage along selvages, turning pieces end for end until every length contributes. A sleeve may spring from the space beside a bodice. A collar finds shelter in the shadow of a skirt. Piecing is not disgrace but thrift's embroidery. A seam set where the eye will not stumble. A tiny gusset hidden in the arm's hollow. A shoulder strengthened by the very join that spared the purse. I have seen a master lift the chalk and, without a word, spare a family a season of worry by discovering a gown inside a scant bolt. The grain keeps counsel throughout. Pieces are laid as birds align to wind. The straight runs where the body bears weight, the cross where kindness is needed, the bias where movement must pour like evening. Chalk marks are moons that will vanish in steaming. Tailors' tacks bloom like pale seeds to guide hands that will not see the pattern again once the shears have spoken. Even the offcuts earn their keep. Binding for edges, ties for points, a ribbon for a child's hair. A patch set aside against the day when love must mend what wear has taught. When at last the table is cleared, the floor holds almost nothing that cannot be named. The garment rises from its quiet arithmetic, seems meeting like old friends at a crossroads. I have known such geometry to warm more than the body. It steadies the spirit to see how, in careful hands, even the smallest piece finds its place. I have shared dawn with packhorses and carts that yawned like old dogs, and I have learned how a life is folded when it must move. Wardrobes on the road travel like prudent pilgrims. Little weight, much wisdom. A cloak becomes a house that walks. A hood learns to be both roof and pillow. Linen shirts, rolled tight as scrolls, keep their temper better than if they were folded into corners that resent being remembered. Wool, forgiving by nature, prefers to be layered rather than argued with. Two thin garments warming more kindly than one thick, the spare ready to replace what rain persuades to sulk. Bundles are made with thought rather than ribbon. A square of stout cloth, corners drawn to meet, ties itself into a satchel that repays the favor by serving later as towel, table, or shade. Oiled leather keeps whether polite. Waxed linen answers in a quieter tone. Within the chest or saddlebag, shoes nest heel to toe like doves that understand travel, and gloves slide inside their fellows as if to keep each other's stories warm. Fur, if carried, is wrapped hair inward so it will not learn dust before it must. The small miracles live in a kit that fits the palm. I have seen a housewife's chatelaine become a Rhodes little guild. Needles in a cloth hive, pins pricked into felt, a skein of strong thread waxed with bees' patience, spare points for hose and doublet, 2 buttons wrapped in the corner of a handkerchief with a note in red to remind where they belong, a narrow blade, a thimble, and a bit of soap hard as a saint's bone answer half the troubles that waylay a sleeve. A soft brush beats road from hem. A twist of lavender persuades baggage to keep a civil breath. A smear of grease returns boot leather from sulk to service. Vinegar in a small vial reproves odors and, if need be, tempers a color that grew too bold under a strange water. Garments for travel understand courtesy. Colors lean toward the forgiving, earth and hedge and shadow, so that the dust that will surely settle may pass for kin. Fastenings are chosen for fingers chilled by wind. Ties are long enough to rethread in poor light. Buckles are simple as honest speech. A belt pouch carries 2 handkerchiefs, one merciful, one proud. A veil or cap spares hair the road's gossip. By night, the cloak turns blanket and the shirt becomes the cool piece under fatigue. By morning, they gather themselves and remember to be presentable without complaint. Thus clothed, a traveler carries not burden but companionship. Things that know how to be many things, and a little kit of mercies that keeps dignity stitched, buttoned, and breathing until the next hearth offers its calmer grammar. I have watched the year dress itself as carefully as any bride, and the body follow suit, altering its grammar stitch by stitch. In the crisp mornings when frost writes pale runes on the pump handle, wool speaks first and loudest. Cloaks thicken. Kirtles accept another friend beneath. Hose learn to be paired with their stouter cousins. Fur steps from its quiet box with the authority of fire. I have stroked lamb that kept a hearth's temper, coney trimmed to civility, squirrel that made a modest dusk along a hood's edge, and, in halls where winter is given a longer name, marten and sable that hold night without sorrow. Linings teach warmth to stay. Cuffs and collars become small embankments against the wind's bright mischief. Midwinter palms remember tallow and smoke. Gloves find their mates. Mitts of felted will make fists into kind houses. Caps pull down to the brow where thought keeps its own heat. The cloak grows clever. Overlapping fronts pinned with a brooch that knows how to catch every stray draft. Hood doubled like a folded wing. I have heard the snow's soft talk on such cloth, and the human breath that threads it, white and faithful. Indoors, garments hang near the hearth on a prudent line, turning like slow planets to drink back pliancy, while shoes dream with their mouths open to the ash's kindly dryness. Spring loosens everything. The knife of wind becomes a spoon. Laces are yielded a hole or two. Fur withdraws to cedar and lavender with thanks. Linen multiplies. Shirts and chemises fresh as cloud. Cuffs bright with the memory of a bleaching field where women laughed across grass and water. Colors wake from earth tones toward leaf and sky. A belt is allowed 1 wink of silk. Rain scolds hems, but a good brush and a patient hand restore order. Vinegar taught to a cloth keeps mold from remembering old triumphs. Then summer stands like a candle that will not be argued with. I have watched the body bargain for shade by means of dress. Linen next to skin, linen over linen, loose and breeze-taut. Ties slacken so breathing may be a village sport. Straw hats draw small private heavens over eyes. Sleeves roll to the democracy of the elbow. Shoes consent to be simpler. Work still asks for decency. Aprons, modest necks. But the day smells of soap drying on a line and time bruised underfoot. Sweat writes its honest footnotes. Washing answers with river and sun. Garments sleep on hedges and lines like white geese along a bank. Autumn rehearses winter in a kindly key. Wool returns by degrees. Linsey Woolsey makes good treaties between chill and cost. Colors step down toward harvest and hedge. I have felt the year fold itself around a life, layer by layer, until cloth and season know each other by heart, and the body, warmed or cooled, reads the weather like a friend rather than an adversary. I have walked lanes that smelled of thyme and sheep, and I have trod alleys warm with ovens and ink. Clothes learn their masters from the ground up. In the fields, dawn decides the wardrobe. The air still carries a bite, so wool that remembers the ewe goes on first. A hooded cloak hangs by the door year-round, quick to shoulder dew, quicker to shed a passing spit of rain. Kirtles take patches early and with good temper. An apron arrives like second skin, thick, plain, and already forgiving of berry juice and ash. Colors keep to hedge and earth. Brown that will not mind a gate's rough kiss, green that salutes nettle and rye, blue tempered by the river that rinsed it. I have watched sleeves rolled to the democracy of the elbow, laces tied in knots that know they will be wet by noon and dry by vespers. Rural time is measured in tasks. Garments oblige. A hem is cut a hand's breadth shorter so mud may not own it. Hose are darned in the foot where furrow and furrow meet. A cap shades eyes that read whether better than letters. Needles work by the fire with thrift's bright patience. Turning a worn bodice, piecing a skirt from the memory of two, setting a gusset where breath has grown wider with years and children. The whole house joins in the cloth schooling. Wash beats rhythm on the river stones. Smoke persuades wool to behave. Lavender under the lid teaches chests to keep counsel. In town, the bell owns the hour and the hour owns the cut. I have seen doublets shaped closer to the rib, skirts trimmed to please a stare, sleeves buttoned like arguments neatly resolved. Cloth is finer by a thread or two, worsted that carries a street's dignity, linen that has learned the city's white. Colors speak somewhat louder, not to boast but to be legible in crowds. A sober stripe for a clerk, a pleasant red for a merchant who must be found. Hoods give way to caps with a modest brim. Girdles carry tools that answer to counters as well as kitchens. A seal, a tally, a penknife keen with parchment. The hair of the day is spice and soap, not hay and river. Urban garments keep company with eyes. Sumptuary whispers travel quicker on paved stone. And tailors' windows teach fashion the way church windows teach light. Yet even there, thrift has a room. Linings pieced from yesterday's sleeves. A patch matched so cunningly that only the wearer knows the kindness. At dusk, when the bells braid the sky to rest, country folk shake dust from hems, townsfolk brush crumbs of trade from lapels, and both kinds of cloth breathe out the same relief. Place writes itself upon us, but the body, grateful, reads comfort in either script. I have walked nights when the town turned its coat inside out and called it festival. At such hours, cloth learned to speak in other tongues. Masks came first, cut from leather softened over steam, or pasted from layers of paper and patience, painted with a temper that made cheek and brow into parables. Behind them, voices slipped their names and moved like lantern light across familiar stones. Motley answered with a many-colored courtesy, bells stitching quick laughter along the edge of every gesture. A fool's hood split into ears that heard the crowd's wish before the crowd knew it, and a short wand tapped truth out of pretense as a fuller's mallet coaxes softness from stubborn wool. Carnival loves reversal. I have seen servants where their masters' cast-off capes turned bright lining outward, as if warmth itself had come to rule for a day. I have watched a matron borrow a youth's plume and walk with a borrowed swagger that fooled no one and pleased everyone. Aprons were tied askew to make a new grammar of hips. Hose were cross-gartered to dance. Old ribbons learned young colors. Hoods sprouted antlers. And straw made a rustling hide for a creature that meant only good mischief. Faces wore a dusting of flour or a soot's crescent moon. And names could be mislaid without harm. Found again at dawn where the church steps caught the quiet. Courtly play answered in a different key, soft as silk and bright as a chapel window at feast. I have stood at the edge of a great chamber where rushes were newly strewn and watched a mask assemble. Bodies dressed as hours and rivers, as forests and stars. Cloth of silver carried the moon indoors. Tissue fell like breath on glass. Spangles learned to mimic constellations with obedient zeal. A visor opened just enough to admit a gaze. A plume nodded like a courteous bow. Sleeves widened into small theaters where hands performed their careful rhetoric. Music bent the room, and the page turned by costume became the page turned by dancing, figures weaving fable and favor through candle smoke. Guilds kept a humbler drama, steady as bread. On wagons that smelt of oak and axle grease, saints and prophets took on borrowed sleeves, linen halos, woolen steadfastness, and the town learned its stories again as if for the first time. Children stared at a bright-winged messenger whose feathers were no more than dyed cloth cut cunningly. Yet the message landed true. In all this play, cloth loaned the body a mask and the heart a permission. And when dawn wiped flour from cheeks and unpinned stars from sleeves, the garments sighed, folded back into their everyday speech, leaving behind a sweetness like music remembered after the lutes are quiet. I have stood where salt teaches would to creak like an old hymn, and watched bales come ashore with the patience of whales. In Hansa towns the quays are sermons in oak. Cranes bend their wooden necks, ropes hum, and cogs ride low with cargo that smells of wind and rain and far promises. Men in wool caps call to one another with words trimmed by weather. Seals are broken. Tallies are sung. In warehouses cool as cloisters, cloth sleeps in rows, broadcloth wrapped against gossip, canvas stacked like spare sails, fine pieces tucked away like secrets waiting for the right ear. The steelyard declares gravity's opinion. The clerk's reed pen adds its small, exact amen. From these ports, I have walked inland where river light grows green and looms keep house with mist. Flemish towns breathe through shutters and canals. Their days are counted by treadles. In those rooms, warp stands like a choir and weft passes in measured antiphon. The cloth that results is sober and sure, worsted smooth as a kept lane, broadcloth fulled until it carries its own weather within it. Tenter fields outside the walls look like music written for wind, length stretched and pinned, the town's breath moving through them until they remember their promised width. Guilds there are stern yet kindly. A seal pressed to selvage is as good as a handshake held a heartbeat longer. Southward, stone warms. Tuscan counters keep the sun in their ledgers. I have watched merchants stroke velvet the wrong way just to see dusk rise in the pile, then smooth it back until night learns manners. Silk hangs in doorways like kept moonlight. Gold thread is weighed with an ethic older than greed. Behind the front room, a tall book lies open. Two clean columns that teach profit and loss to speak respectfully to one another. Letters travel folded like swallows, carrying instruction across mountains. What color sold in the north under rain, which width the Germans trusted, how much alum the dyers begged for to make their reds honest. A small seal in green wax closes a bargain no sea can ruin. Thus a sleeve may carry weather from far cities. A cuff smelling faintly of tar and nutmeg. A lining learned from a Lombard's patience. A hem that has listened to gulls. Cloth towns speak to one another by bales and bells. Ports answer with rigging and tide. Looms reply with rhythm. Counters conclude with figures that keep bread on many tables. And when a traveler lifts his arm to hail a friend, the fabric that moves bears a whisper of salt, a hint of dye-house steam, and the quiet scratch of a pen that once believed in tomorrow. I have sat at tables where evening gathered like a shawl and watched a needle ferry hope across tired cloth. Mending begins with a listening. The thumb explores the thinness at a knee, the shine at an elbow, the small star where a spark married a sleeve. Light is set slantwise so threads confess. The garment is turned inside out to show its private geography. A thimble slips on like a habit remembered by bone. Then the little rites commence, the thread drawn across beeswax to smooth its temper, the knot breathed upon to lie modestly, the first pierce where damage turns toward healing. Patches are promises cut from the past. A square taken from a cuff that outlived its shirt, a triangle from a hem spared when a skirt was shortened, a bit of lining that never learned weather. These become new ground. I have seen a mother choose the patch as a mother chooses a word. Color near enough not to shout, weave near enough to agree, sometimes a cheerfully different shade to confess the history rather than hide it. Edges are turned under as tempers are. Tiny stitches bite around, patient teeth that hold without scarring. When the garment is right side out again, the patch appears like a quiet field fence true. Darning is a more inward art, a loom made in the air. A stocking is drawn over a wooden egg or mushroom so that the whole becomes a sunrise, the edges taut as horizon. First come the long bridges, warp laid soft from sound cloth to sound cloth, each thread bringing a plank to span the absence. Then the weft wanders and returns, over and under, a small, stubborn river until emptiness forgets itself. I have seen honeycombs formed for heels that work like mills. I have seen a ghost of the original pattern followed stitch for stitch until even pride could not find the mend. Sometimes the thread is chosen darker on purpose, a little badge of endurance. Sometimes it is near invisible, an act of mercy performed without witness. Garments remember these attentions. A coat lined thrice grows kindly stiff at the placket, like an elder who stands straighter for having been helped. A child's sleeve shows moons upon moons where growth and rough play met the needle's calm. I have found old shirts whose collars carry initials of several hands, red letters blooming like small survivals along the years. Mending, done often enough, becomes its own story. Touch layered upon touch, love teaching cloth to last past disappointment. When the lamp is finally turned down, the needle rests in its cushion. The thread is coiled like a sleeping thought, and the garment, patched, darned, forgiven, breathes easier. I have felt such pieces weigh warmer on the shoulders, as if gratitude itself had taken up residence between warp and weft. I have listened to garments as others listen to rain, and I have learned a city by the noises it wears. Wool speaks first in colder months. A low thrum like bees behind a wall, especially where cloaks overlap and hems graze one another. It is a hearth-bound sound, a kindly murmur that steadies stair and street. Linen answers in clearer weather with a cool, papery whisper. Sleeves brushing like turning pages, skirts breathing at the knee the way a sail takes a cautious breeze. Silk does not speak so much as exhale. It keeps its secrets and offers only the faintest sigh, as if light itself were stroking a sleeping cat. Leather remembers roads. A belt has a language of creak and ease, and the buckle gives a small, decided click that is half promise, half farewell to idleness. From that belt hangs a house's quiet orchestra, keys that chime like little bells behind the hip, a knife's sheath that murmurs against wool, a chatelaine's bright trinkets touching in soft metallic conversation. In markets, those sounds gather into a thin, companionable music. You may follow it through stalls, glass beads making rain upon each other, coins greeting a palm with a discreet kiss, shears pronouncing their calm snick as a width is proved true. There are footnotes in sound that only patience reads. A starch-stiff cuff taps once when a hand lifts. A thread-wrapped button knocks lightly at the table's edge. A laced bodice yields a breath when loosened, the cord slipping through eyelets with the hush of reeds against a boat. In winter, fur strokes fur and answers with a muffled comfort. In summer, a straw brim rasps faintly when tilted, dry as noon grass. Pattens outside remember cobbles with a tempered clack, but indoors the shoe alone returns to its modest hush, learning the carpet's discretion and the rush mat's friendly rustle. Sacred hours have their own wardrobe of sound. In a church, vestments move like low water over stone. Orphreys kiss wood with a softened brush. The rope of a bell draws through a gloved hand, its fibers giving a sleepy purr before metal speaks. At home by lamplight, the seamstress's thread sings a hair-thin note as it slips the cloth. Scissors breathe warm against a palm after work. A thimble returns to its cushion with a feathered tap that tells the day it may rest. Even silence keeps company with clothing. The pause when a cloak is lifted from a peg. The attentive stillness as a pin finds its place. The long, even quiet of folded linen asleep in cedar. I have found comfort in that quiet as in music, for both are manners of kindness. The body enters its garments, and the world learns our approach by these gentle noises. A language sweet enough to travel ahead of us, soft enough to be forgiven when we arrive. I have opened chests that breathed like old gardens and found the past folded there, still warm with remembered touch. A christening shirt small as a sparrow's faith. A wedding veil pale as frost. A mantle lined and relined until it learned the curve of many shoulders. Each piece weighted with a patience that does not hurry the living. Heirlooms are not merely kept, they are rehearsed. I have watched a mother draw a linen cap from lavender and lay it upon a newborn's brow, the thread remembering how to be gentle. I have seen a veil pinned for a niece, its edge strengthened by a new hand's discreet courage. Stitches from different decades make a quiet constellation, love mapped in pale stars. Giftings move like blessings along a table. On evenings of bequest, garments pass from hand to hand while candles think aloud. This apron to the daughter who keeps bread brave in winter. That cloak to the friend who always arrives in weather. The fur-lined hood to a neighbor whose walk is long. Names are spoken softly into cloth, and cloth learns its next house. Some garments carry the small grammar of farewell. I have known a shirt whose cuffs held tiny letters in red, initials added each time the piece mended a season, now folded into a bundle for a grandson who never met the first hand to wear it. There are belts whose mounts have brightened beneath many palms, thimbles that have guided generations of patience, buttons that have been unpicked from one life and sewn upon another without losing their temper. When the last hour calls, linen returns to its first tenderness. A shroud is simple as mercy, stitched with long, forgiving seams, washed until it speaks only of water and air. I have stood while it was spread upon a bed like calm weather, herbs tucked at wrist and brow, rosemary for remembrance, bay for steadfastness, a whisper of orris to sweeten parting. Pins take their places without fuss. Cords are tied as if closing a well-loved book. Afterward, garments remain in the house like quiet elders. A coat over a chair keeps the slope of a familiar shoulder. A glove curled in a drawer holds the habit of a hand. In time, some pieces are cut down for smaller lives, some given to the poor, and some kept whole for the comfort they lend to winter talk. I have folded such remnants with a care that steadies breathing, for I know how a life lingers in a seam, the way laughter hides in turned hems, and sorrow, once mended, leaves a tender strength. The chest closes, cedar breathes its blessing, and the house goes on, clothed in memory that fits as kindly as wool. I have walked you through workshops where dawn keeps its breath, through gardens where colors learn to pray, along roads that smell of salt, smoke, and rosemary. Now the looms rest, their shuttles sleeping like small birds, and the last skein dangles with the satisfied weight of work completed. Cloth has spoken in every register it knows. Linen's cool grammar, wool's hearth-warm thrum, silk's moonlit hush, and the body has answered with modest laces, honest seams, and vows kept close as a hem. We have read a life by its edges and its mends, by the keys that chimed at a hip and the faint lavender that drifted from a chest opened at evening. I remain, as ever, the patient witness. I have seen how matter becomes meaning, how flax remembers the hand that pulled it, how a sleeve can promise, how a patch can absolve. I have stood in markets where bales opened like loaves, and in sacristies where vesture learned to carry light without boasting. I have watched badges turn roads into prayers, shame garments bend toward mercy, wedding cloth fold futures into cedar and hope. Everywhere, thread tied itself to breath, and breath wrote itself across the day, until a life grew legible without a word spoken. If you listen now, you may still hear the small music that lingers when the hall empties. The soft click of a buckle finding rest, the faint susurrus of linen settling upon itself, a pair of scissors breathing cool against wood. It is the sound of care withdrawing its hands yet refusing to depart, the way a good fire abides even when the last log turns to quiet light. Let that sound keep you, as a cloak keeps weather at a respectful distance. Let it dim the corners of the room into gentleness, so sleep can read the path to you without stumbling. I will walk on, as I always do, among the garments left warm on chairs, the shoes dreaming by the door, the needles asleep in their velvet hives. When morning comes, cloth will wake to its old duties, and the world will fit itself, layer by gracious layer, to the body that must cross the hours. And if this long, woven journey has eased your waking thoughts or lent your night a softer edge, know that I will be here again, where thread learns to breathe and memory is folded, to keep you company when evening asks for quiet.